So Mission Impossible Rogue Nation was the fifth Mission Impossible movie, and it was directed by Christopher McQuarrie, and once again features Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt, as well as featuring the return of various people such as Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, Jeremy Renner. Also features Rebecca Ferguson, Sean Harris, Alec Baldwin, and this time around, following the events of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, Ethan Hunt is tracking down this group known as the Syndicate, who was teased in the last movie, and when they discover that, he is, after them, they basically frame him for something, and once again, he has to try to prove that he's not the rogue agent, and they have to track down this agent who is killing other agents. So this was a movie that, admittedly, I was not looking forward to when it first came out, and it was actually the very first Mission Impossible movie I ever saw, so I was kind of lost in a little bit of the details about this movie. But I heard a lot of really good things about this movie, and when I was like, oh, I guess I should check this out then. I should probably check it out. I haven't seen any other ones, but maybe I should check this one out because I hear it's really good. And I remember just sitting there in the theater, and I had an absolute blast with this movie. This movie is a lot of fun. This movie is great. And even though it holds up, and I think it holds up years later, even though I think Fallout is a little bit better, I'll talk about Mission Impossible Fallout momentarily. But let's talk about Rogue Nation first. So, what works in Rogue Nation? Well, I do think the actors do a really good job in this movie. Tom Cruise, he does a really good job in this movie. I've really come to appreciate Tom Cruise over the years. Because, like, when I was growing up, Tom Cruise was like, he was a big action star. He had all these great movies, and then he kind of went off the wagon a bit in that era around War of the Worlds. But he's come back, and like he's really leaned into the whole, I'm gonna try to do this, and I'm gonna try to do my own stunts in these movies. And I actually really appreciate for that. Like when he's like hanging on the plane, it's like I actually believe that. When he's like underwater, I actually believe that. When he's like in the motorcycle chase, I believe that. He's really good in this movie, and his acting is also really good in this movie too. Not as good as it is in Fallout, but it's still some of the best acting he's done in this franchise. Among the new additions, the two new additions that really stood out were Rebecca Ferguson and Sean Harris. Rebecca Ferguson, I thought she was really good in this movie. I liked her character. I liked it was like you kind of can't tell whether she's going to be a good guy or a bad guy, and they kind of like have to figure her out, and she won't really tell them what the plan is exactly. I do really like her character in this movie, and I'm really glad they brought her back for the rest of these movies so far. Sean Harris is also a surprisingly good villain in this movie. Mission Impossible's villains have been pretty hit or miss. Like the villain in 2 and 4 were not that great. In this movie, the villain is actually somewhere in the middle. He's not quite as good as someone like Philip Seymour Hoffman, but Sean Harris, he's pretty creepy enough, even though his character doesn't really have a whole lot to do other than just be creepy. But he does a really good job with it. He is intimidating, and I wouldn't want to encounter him, but he did a really good job. But also, I actually really like the use of the other team members in this movie. Ving Rhames, he gets a lot more to do in these movies, probably the most that he's done since the first movie. But again, we'll talk about 6 later. Also, Simon Pegg gets a lot more to do in this movie. I do like the back and forth between all of them in this movie, and it's still a really funny movie, despite the fact that it's mostly just action-packed and it's adrenaline-filled. It's still a really fun and funny movie. Like, there are a lot of moments where I was laughing, and I'm like, that was just funnier than most comedies that come out. I don't know how they do that. And once again, the action in this movie is just incredible. The opening scene where Tom Cruise is literally hanging on a plane, he's just holding on for dear life before he flies into the plane itself. That is great. I kind of wish I saw that on a bigger screen, but that was just an incredible sequence. Another great sequence. There are so many car chases that are actually really effective and a lot of fun. They still try to have some humor in those scenes. It's actually a lot of fun just watching these movies. And while you could argue that Mission Impossible doesn't have the most developed storylines, I can defend it by saying, yeah, but it's not really about the stories. It's more about the action sequences. And I think Rogue Nation at the time had some of the best action sequences. Again, Fallout has some better sequences. But there's also a lot of great thrilling sequences, like the scene in the Opera House I thought was really good. Like, Tom Cruise is like trying to, catch Rebecca Ferguson, but like all these things keep happening. Like the bars are lifted and he's like raised up on the bars. Like it's fun, it's intense, it's thrilling. You kind of don't know what's going to happen next. And it also, the underwater sequence was also really well done. It's like, that is some intense, like that is a fear of mine. Like just something like that happening, and it's like that kind of may have played into that a bit. But it was a really well done sequence. It was thrilling. It was unpredictable. A lot of things kind of just went wrong, and it kind of learned a lot from Ghost Protocol, where it's like a lot of things just kind of happen that may not be good for them, and at least they try to overcome it or they try to adapt to it. It also works in this movie too, and I think that was one of the great lessons they kind of took from Ghost Protocol. Also, making more use of the team in this movie. I think this movie has the most action of the team, at least for now, until again we get to Fallout. I feel like this is a bad review because I keep talking about Mission Impossible Fallout, but I'm going to talk about that shortly. But let's get into what I don't like about Rogue Nation, Admittedly, I think the third act is kind of weak, and that is kind of a disappointment because I do think the rest of the sequences are pretty cool, but I would argue it has a better finale than something like Ghost Protocol. I do think like a lot of the sequences in the first two acts are great, and the sequence in the last act is good, but it's not. It doesn't really stand out as well as some of the other sequences. And I think it's a little too similar to Ghost Protocol at times. Like there are moments where it's like, okay, this is just like the scene from Ghost Protocol, and just like this scene. They took a lot of things from that movie that worked and put them in this movie, like again the use of the team and building up on the sequences and changing the villain a lot. But that doesn't mean they had to keep everything. And sometimes I'm just watching as like I get that a lot of these Mission Impossible movies are kind of the same, but at the same time I'm like, you could have done that a little bit better. You could have done something a little bit different. At least all these other Mission Impossible movies beforehand have done something somewhat different before each movie, but oh well, it doesn't matter because this is still a really good movie. At the time, it's my second favorite Mission Impossible movie. The acting's great, the action is great, the thrills are incredible, the sequences are pretty good. It is a really funny movie, and the rest of the team gets a lot to do in this movie. Even though I feel like it's a little too similar to Ghost Protocol, and also I kind of felt like the last act was a little bit weak compared to the rest of the movie, this is still a really well done action movie. I will give Mission Impossible Rogue Nation 3.5 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what's your favorite moment in the Mission Impossible movie? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.